Hi guys. Hi Daisy. Hi Eli. How you doing today?
Good.
Good. Well, my name is Peter Girguis. You can just call me Pete. And today I think we're going to have a bunch of fun talking about the deep sea. So this is your show. You tell me what you want to talk about. Let's do it.
So we both wrote some questions. Eli's are most from his head, but I wrote some down.
Just come up with some.
Do you want to go first?
What's the deepest in the ocean that you've ever gone? Like, or have you gone? Have you gone like deep in the ocean? Like,
Yeah. So I that's always a fun question because it's a fun story for me personally. The deepest I've been in the ocean is about 13,000 feet, something like that. And the we did that in a tiny thing called a submersible. Now a submersible is a submarine that lives on a ship, and it was my very first time in a submersible. I was actually a graduate student, right? So when people go to college, right, and you get your 4-year degree, afterwards, if you want to keep studying and become an expert, even more of an expert in a field, and maybe want to be a professor to teach it, you go to graduate school. So there I was. It was graduate school. It was like my first day of graduate school, or first month of graduate school, and we went to sea, and I got to do a dive in the world's most famous submersible. It's called Alvin, and I did a dive with a professor who'd been in Alvin a bunch of times and picked a site for us to dive on. And that site was, he picked it from a map out of a magazine, which meant it had a typo. And so we did this dive and we kept going deeper and deeper and deeper. And everybody insisted we were in the wrong spot. But he's like, no, this is it. We're fine. And we ended up doing this really, really, really deep dive. And we ran out of main power. Now on the submarine, on the submersible, if you run out of power, it's okay. There's backups and there's backups. It's not a real issue. But it scared the bejesus out of me. Folks, I was so scared because I didn't know better. I thought, oh my gosh, the pilot turned off all the lights and turned off the radio because we were listening to music, which is really fun, and said, we have to conserve power. And I didn't know what that meant. But the truth is, we were perfectly safe. So I think it's funny that my very first dive was my deepest dive, was unintended, and then we come up barely squeaking through on our reserve power. How's that for fun?
that sounds fun and a bit freaky.
Yes,
Okay.
it was.
Before we talk about animals, I'm just gonna flat out ask this, and the result may be a big embarrassment to you, or maybe something regular and casual. Are you a good swimmer?
I'm a good swimmer, but
Okay.
let me explain a little bit. And by the way, these are important questions to ask, right? Sometimes we have to put embarrassment or whatever, any of that nonsense, just put it in the trash, because at the end of the day, we all have good things and we have things that we want to get better at. So I'm a pretty good swimmer in some ways. I'm a really good swimmer when I have fins and scuba gear on, because my legs are kind of heavy. And so if I don't have fins on and I'm like doing, sort of freestyle, oh, I'm a bad swimmer. But you put fins on me and I can kind of outgun a lot of people with fins too. So it's a little bit of a mix.
Cool.
So medium.
Do you want to take the next?
What's your favorite animal to study?
Oh, I don't, Eli, that's not fair. They're all so cool. So let me pick one or two. Let me pick one, and then we'll see if how you all are feeling. If you want to talk about some others, so one of my favorite animals to study is the giant tube worms that live at underwater hot springs, right? And if you give me a second here, ooh, excuse me. Let me say that again. If you give me a second here, I have a picture to share with you. So let me go ahead and hop on over.
Even though you knew that you didn't know the answer to the question, you knew it was going to be asked. It's always asked.
It's always
Something similar to that in every subject is always going to be asked.
every time. All right, so check this out. All right, and give me just a second.
Whoa.
And I'm going to tell you about.
That is a strange picture.
Okay, so this, Eli and Daisy, is one of my favorite animals to study. It's a tube worm that lives at underwater hot springs. So you're probably familiar with, Yellowstone and geysers and hot springs and things like that, right? Areas where the water comes up and it's been heated through, let's call it the influence of heat in the ground beneath our feet, right? Volcanoes and magma chambers, all that. Those occur in the deep sea as well. And around them, we tend to find all these incredibly dense communities of animals and microbes. This is what the very first hydrothermal vent animal that I studied when I was doing my doctorate research. That meant when I finished my bachelor's degree and I wanted to do more research, I studied this worm. This is a worm called Riftia. Now, the cool thing about Riftia is that it's found in some pretty amazing environments. And I'm going to show you a little video here. This is actually a hydrothermal vent, and it looks like a giant smoking chimney in the seafloor, right? And it's surrounded by just millions, if billions actually, of bacteria, if not trillions, and lots of these kinds of animals. And these environments are really, they're really lush. There's like a lot of stuff living around here. What's really cool is this whole community is living off of that hot water. The microbes can grow off that hot water. Believe it or not, they get chemicals out of it, and they can grow off of those chemicals, and a lot of animals eat them. And so it goes, right? Now, I love this worm because we like to call it a gutless wonder. So check this out. Riftia, this worm, gets to be about, maybe let's call it 4 feet long or a little over a meter. It is very kind of meaty. I don't want to gross you out, but it has the kind of consistency of like an Italian sausage, right? So it's this like really beefy, meaty animal, but it has no mouth, has no throat, no gut, no digestive tract. It doesn't pee or poo. Instead of doing that, this essentially kind of sealed off animal grows bacteria inside it like a culture, and it feeds those bacteria the chemicals they need to grow, and the bacteria in turn feed the animal. So it's a symbiosis. It's what we call a symbiosis. And it's an amazing symbiosis because the bacteria that live inside these worms, they live off of the chemicals that come out of the vents, some of which are way toxic to the animal. But the animal has evolved all these cool ways to stick to those toxic compounds and take them to the bacteria without poisoning itself. But it gets even crazier. This worm is one of the fastest growing animals that we know of. And a lot of my lab's research has been on this worm Riftia. So again, no mouth, no gut, no peeing, no pooing, but they take up all the chemicals through this feathery thing. It's called their plume, right? It sort of looks like a plume, and this is actually the worm's gill. Fishes have gills to breathe. This worm has this gill that looks like a feather sticking out the top. Okay. And a lot of the work in my lab has really focused on studying these microbes. See, so here's a picture of them, and they live deep inside the worm. I'm going to skip ahead here really quick, and I'm going to tell you how we do this, because this is also kind of fun. I know I'm taking you off on a bit of a tangent here, but we built a laboratory that can recreate the high pressures in the deep sea. And in that laboratory, we keep these worms alive. So here are 2 Riftia worms inside an aquarium. The pressure inside here, folks, is 4,000 PSI. Now, that PSI stands for pounds per square inch. It's a pressure. The pressure in your bike tires is about 40. But 4,000 PSI is about 2 tons per square inch. For people who don't deal with that sort of the US system of measurement, it's about 200 atmospheres of pressure, or 27 kilopascal, if that's your thing. So what does that mean, though? Let's make this even simpler. Take your parents' car and put it on a stick, kind of like a broom handle, and put that broom handle on your hand and then stack the car on top. And that gets you to several thousand PSI. So it gives you a sense of how much pressure is squeezing down on these worms. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So what's been really exciting, though, Daisy and Eli, is that as a graduate student, I worked with my PhD advisor. He's the professor who taught me and coached me. And we figured out how to grow these worms and keep them alive and happy and show that they grow really fast, even though they live in the deep sea where it's cold and everyone thinks everything is slow, even though they have no mouth. And even though they live around toxic chemicals, their symbiosis with the bacteria means that they grow faster than bamboo and wheat and all sorts of other things we think of as fast growing. So it totally changed the way we think about these animals in the deep sea, just around hydrothermal vents. Okay. But
Have you ever got to like touch the feather or like a dead one with gloves, probably?
Oh yeah. So I don't know if there's a picture of this, but when we study these animals, we bring them up on the Alvin submersible or a robot sub. And my lab tries to put them into the high pressure vessels right away to keep them nice and safe and healthy. When we're done with the experiments, we'll take the animals and, unfortunately we have to dissect them and sacrifice them. So we try and do it quick and be respectful and try and get as much as we can out of just a small number of animals. Sometimes when we bring the animals up, some of the ones that were dead on the seafloor, or some of them come up and they're not in really good shape, we preserve and use for teaching. And we do silly things. So there's a picture of me, Daisy, with one of these worms in a hot dog bun. And I know it's silly, but nothing makes grown-ups and kids laugh than occasionally something silly. But we then took that worm and we preserved it so we can take it to schools and show people what they really look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I have held them. They're really weird and squishy and feathery.
Downstairs for lunch.
See, we're calling our kids over for lunch. So I'll repeat that again. I have held them. They're really feathery and kind of squishy. But the body itself feels like a sausage. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really cool. How fast do they grow and mature?
They grow. So they can grow as fast as 10% a day. Now you two are familiar with percent, right? So
Yeah.
let's pretend that Eli weighs 100 pounds. And then let's pretend that Eli goes to bed one night and wakes up the next day and he weighs 110 pounds. And then the day after that, he weighs 121 pounds and so on. That's what these worms are capable of doing when they're growing at the best conditions, which is crazy fast, folks, like crazy fast.
These are very good analogies.
Really fast.
What tools do you use to study deep sea animals and what they might have looked like?
We use a lot of different tools to study the deep sea. One of the things that we try and do when we go into the deep sea is make as many measurements as we can and many observations as we can, right? And remember, the deep sea is a hard place to work. The pressures are high. I mentioned to you it's several thousand pounds per square inch, or several atmospheres, hundreds of atmospheres, or many kilopascal for those who think in kilopascals. So it's a lot of pressure, right? What we have to do is figure out what kind of equipment we can take down there and how do we keep it safe. But Daisy, we take down cameras, lots of video, right? So that we can come back and watch it again and really understand what happened. We take down still cameras, just like your digital camera on a phone or just a little handheld. We also take down a lot of chemical sensors. My lab does a lot of work in that area in particular. So what we want to do is we want to sniff the chemicals around the worms. Because remember, I can't just open a door and take a whiff and be like, ooh, that smells like almonds, No. I mean, we're in a little tiny submarine that's 2 meters across on the inside, or 6 feet, and we're looking out little viewports, or we're controlling a robot.
Yeah.
So we can't actually access the environment. So we got lots of chemical sensors, lots of sniffers. The other cool thing, though, Daisy, is one way we can look around on the seafloor is to use sound. Think about that for a second. We can actually look around the seafloor by using sound. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. I cannot go on a boat and look down and see the bottom of the ocean. right? The deepest part of the ocean, let's call it roughly 30,000 feet. I can't do that because water blocks the light and water is really challenging to see through. But you and I can stand on our porches and see the surface of the moon, right? A couple 100,000 miles away. That's because the vacuum of space and air allows us to see things far away, but we can't do that in the deep sea very easily. So believe it or not, an important thing we do is we use sound. We actually make deliberate sounds, aim it at the seafloor, and listen to how fast they come back, right? And that's sonar. And we can use different wavelengths of sound to actually make maps of the seafloor. That is a super important tool of ours.
That's so cool. I would never really think of sound. It's something you take for granted. It's not something you really use every day. I mean, you use sight and touch mostly.
But you won't be able
some
to
people
hear anything.
Well, yeah, but you don't really think about it as a tool.
Yeah, you think about it just oh, I can hear you, and I can hear you talk, and I can understand you.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Daisy and Eli, that's a really important point. And if I may, offer this up, as you two continue to sort of study the world around you, I think it's really important to look around and say, how do different creatures sense their world, right?
Yeah.
So you probably know that bats do this thing called echolocation, right? They use sound to see how far they are away. So do whales. And so in a way, we're just copying what nature has already done with lots of animals, giving them the ability to use different tools.
Yeah, I found an article saying it was a bunch of things that we did that we copied animals with. Like there was this spray. I don't know if it was too good for the environment, but you sprayed it on things and it would slide through. They used it for cement because it would you use 1/3 of the cement, just pouring it through the tube. So you'd spray it on the cement. And there was some animal that did that, but it was a really cool
made
article.
itself really slick.
Probably something like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool, you two. I had no idea. So now you've taught me something. I got to go look that up. That's really cool. Yeah, we call that bioinspiration. When we actually see something in nature, it gives us an idea that we should try. And it's just all around us. So yeah, good point.
As a kid, I think you said in the video, you wanted to be an astronaut. How did you find out about marine biology?
One of the things that I laugh at now, Daisy, is I look back and try and remember the things I was excited about as a kid, and then I save some of my papers and things. And I apparently, even when I was about, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, I was drawing killer whales and blue whales and submarines.
Oh.
And I used to beg my parents, take me to SeaWorld, and at the time anyway, SeaWorld was where a lot of us went to learn about these animals, right? And I know SeaWorld's complicated, but at the time, to go and see some of these creatures was oh my goodness. Or we'd go on a whale watching boat. So I think that's one answer. But the other thing though, Daisy, is that I think I like the idea of exploring. And even as a young kid, and now as an old big kid, the idea of just being able to go and learn and check things out and learn something new completely makes me happy.
Yeah.
So the two of you, there are probably things about you who you are now that are going to be a part of who you are as an adult.
Definitely.
Do you have any other questions?
What's the weirdest animal you've ever studied? The weirdest.
The weirdest animal I've ever studied. Let me say that the weirdest animal that I've ever studied is probably that worm I mentioned. And just remember, before we, not me, but we, the community, found these worms, people just didn't know that kind of thing existed. Nobody thought that an animal had a bunch of bacteria in their belly. Well, it's not really their belly, but where their belly should be. And they have 1 billion bacteria in one worm. And some of the big worms probably have 10 billion. That's crazy. So one of these big worms has more bacteria inside it than there are people on Earth, right? It's crazy talk. But The neatest, weirdest animals, in my opinion, mainly live in what we call the midwater, the part of the ocean that's big and blue and dark and just really vast. So I haven't studied a lot of animals in the midwater, but I want to show you a picture of one of my favorite. You all may have seen it before. So let's see. Let's take a look and see if it's
Maybe
something.
it's one of my favorites. I don't know, like I just know about it and I think it's cute, so it's my favorite. Because I barely know about any.
What is it?
You'll see it. If he brings it up, then I'll tell him that it's what I was thinking of.
And if he doesn't, then you just tell us anyway. Okay.
Well, because it's in most of my questions.
I got it. Okay, so let's see here. All right, so I want to show you a picture of what I think is one of the weirdest animals. Now, Daisy, I thought I heard you say that you have some of your own favorite weird animals too, right?
Yeah. I have one main one that I like.
Okay. Well, this is one of my
Oh,
favorites.
Oh yeah. I remember that one.
Oh, tell me, please. I'm all ears.
It has a clear head, and its eyes
Yep.
are those little two beady things. So it sees up through its head.
That's
I
it.
forget what it's called though. I should have remembered that. What's it called?
Don't know.
I'll give you a hint. These are its eyes, these big green things, and they're shaped like something we store juice or wine or water in. So it starts with a B.
Oh,
Well,
I
go on.
oh.
Let's say I'll give you this one. Barrel.
Oh, it's a barrelhead
Barrelfish.
fish.
Barrelhead
No, it's like
fish.
a barrelhead fish or something
It's
like
a
that.
barrel eye spookfish. I mean, come on. How is that not the coolest name ever? And you two are totally on top of this. I love this fish. So for those who may watch this who don't know what this is, so check this out. This is a fish that lives in the midwater, right? Little fish here. It's got some neat features. This is its mouth.
It looks like it's like puckering up to kiss something.
Right? Right? Which makes it even creepier, in my opinion. This, go ahead, Daisy.
Wasn't that its nose?
Yeah, you got it. This is the equivalent of its nose. This is its like olfactory sensors. That's what we would call them.
It's just the wrong place for a nose. I mean, you'd expect like
right?
that, and it's very confusing.
I totally agree. That's why I love this fish, because even now, I've taught about this fish for like 15 years or something. Even now, I look at this, I'm like, that's got to be its eyes. That's just wrong. That's all kinds of wrong. But though that's its nose. This is, well, roughly its nose. It's what it sniffs with, if you will. This is a transparent head, and inside it are its two gigantic eyes that can rotate. Imagine if you could just sit still and like look all the way up and see through your skull and see the ceiling above you.
Well, that would be really cool.
Right?
Boring to see the ceiling all day instead of like people.
Yeah, but then if everybody could do that, then they would probably have more decoration.
Yeah,
on the
they
ceiling.
like paint the ceiling.
Like the civilization would.
You two are hysterical. You guys are, that's like total genius. Like if only we could see through our heads, then you could have like paintings on the ceiling. Like what? Like the Sistine Chapel, right?
Oh, I had a teacher who hung all of our art on the ceiling with sticks. Kind of dangerous if you think back on it. Like sometimes you just look up and worry that the staples would fall down, but it was nice.
Right. But check this out. So actually that's a really good point, because this fish has eyes that can look up. And people are always asking me like, what is that about? Now, remember, this is the midwater. And I was sharing earlier that the midwater is gigantic and expansive. There's a lot of space. And it's usually dark, or in the deep sea, there's no sunlight. Just above the deep sea, the light is really kind of dim. And your organisms, they make their own light, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. But they need to have really good eyes, believe it or not. People tend to think that animals that live in some parts of the midwater don't have good eyes. They have some fantastic eyes. Our friend the barrel eye here looks up because we think it uses it to look for prey items or food or things coming from above, right? When it's hunting, we think it rotates its eyes forward and can go and get what it wants to eat. So it gives it an ability to look around in this huge, vast, expansive midwater in a way that you couldn't do if you had eyes and sockets, kind of like we do.
When you when you first saw the barrelfish, when the first person who discovered that fish, I don't want to pronounce the whole name because I'm worried I'm going to mess it up. What do you think they thought of it? And also, add-on question, how did they find out that its eyes were its nose?
Oh, yeah.
So brains up there or its eyes?
Yeah. So let me just point out a couple of things just before I answer your question. Mouth, sniffy parts, eyes, brain, clear head, right? So Daisy and Eli, you two hit upon a really important point. One of the things about exploration in the deep sea is that so much of what we have done as biologists anyway has relied on nets or dredges, the kinds of things where you drop it in the water, you bring a bunch of stuff up and you look at it. Super important way of studying the ocean. And when scientists do it, we don't tend to do it at a big scale that's really deeply worrisome, right? We're not damaging entire ecosystems. At least we try not to, for goodness sake. But you bring this stuff up and you dump it in a bucket, literally on the ship, and you start going through it. When they first identified this fish, it was many decades ago, but they didn't know this is what it did or what it looked like, because this transparent covering over its head is often gone. When you bring an animal up in these nets, especially these really delicate animals in the midwater, right? They're delicate. They don't have to deal with gravity in the same way you and I do. And they have all sorts of body features that really work well in the midwater. It just doesn't work well when you beat them up in a net and bring them up. So,
yeah, I remember seeing, like the
blobfish, it doesn't actually look like that because it's just people brought it up too fast and thought it looked cool.
Yeah, you two are all over this, right? So when they discovered these fishes, Daisy, they didn't know that this is what it did, and it wasn't until only I forget the exact date, but certainly within the last 20 years, that my colleagues at a place called the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute went down with robot subs and took some amazing video, and that helped us understand the behaviors of this really cool critter, right? So.
My favorite weirdest animal is, I forget what it's called, but it's the one that's really long, and has a mouth that it can just like unhinge and it becomes like really, really big, even though it's just like really thin.
That thing. It's like a dragonfish, right? Isn't it? Like it has. Wait, I think I'm thinking of the wrong one. I think I'm thinking of like a land snake, but like, doesn't it have like a throat that detaches and comes out?
Do you guys want to see a video?
Sure.
It's
So
like
let's make sure. Let's be good scientists and make sure we're talking about the same creature. So what I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eli, is that there's something out there that's long and skinny and eel-like, but it's got this big jaw, or it's got kind of a big mouth, and it can unhinge it and like eat big things.
Yeah, that's it. It's just like huge.
I wonder if we're talking about the same one. We'll know right away though, because
it's really ugly too.
Yep.
Like, it's not like a majestic creature that just looks weird because it has a big mouth. It's really ugly.
So now here's ugly is relative, my friend. They think we're ugly, right? Can you imagine all the deep sea creatures if that
They're like,
we could figure out how?
What?
Right? They might look at the Alvin submersible that I dive in and be like, "What is that giant white toilet?" It's all relative. Now, I have a couple of videos I want to share with you, and I think this might be the creature we're talking about. So let me show you one, and then I have a second one if we have.
We're not talking about the same thing. So.
Okay, here we go. So remember, I told you that my friends at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute do a lot of work with submarines, and that gives them a chance to really There we go. Gives them a chance to see things that you can't see without without a robot sub or without a submarine. If you did try to do this with a net, you wouldn't see this. So this is a creature called a gulper eel. Okay, let me see if I can get
I
this.
think. Then,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Okay.
it.
I think.
Yeah. Now take a look at how it swims, right? It does this thing, its body undulates, right? It's like it does what a snake does. Check it out. That's so trippy.
I think it was a dragonfish or something.
Well, hey, I think
But that's
we know
cool.
about this too, and it's
Yeah. Check it out. So it's got that big jaw. Now, Eli, you just brought up, oh, check it out. Isn't that crazy? It just it ballooned out its mouth. Did you see that? You want to see it again?
sure,
Yes.
just for the
Okay,
sake
watch
of
this.
I thought that was as big as it got.
Do you see its mouth?
I remember seeing a video of like this, like doing weird things with its head to the submarine.
Yeah. So the thing is, folks, and I'll I think we'll stop it here. These fish, we catch fish like this in nets, but it's very rare to see them with a submarine like this. So this video is really precious. So I'll stop there. But Eli, you hit upon an important point. There's lots of animals in the deep sea that have this ability it's called distend their jaw. Why do you think that matters, Daisy? Let's ask Daisy.
Because well, if a few points. One, if they have poor sight, then it's very helpful. Two, if they have like poor aim, and like for some fish, like they only see one way.
Yeah.
Like you know how what are they called? Well, like
Anything
prey like
but
cheetahs have their eyes forward, and
Their
no,
their field of view, right?
yeah, like
They have different fields of view.
yeah. Thank you.
Whoop and whoop.
Yeah, really super good points. So imagine you live in the deep sea, and maybe you do have some of these fishes probably do have poor eyesight, and you can imagine being able to take a big gulp increases the chances you're going to catch what you're after. The other thing,
Bigger things.
right? And
Like
eating bigger things. So Eli, that's an important point, because one of the coolest things about the deep sea is we see all these different body shapes. We have to remind ourselves that they exist and have evolved because they have a purpose. And in the deep sea, a lot of those animals in the midwater, they don't live around the vents. They don't have microbes to grow off of chemicals. They're in this blue water and they eat the stuff that falls down from above, because there's not enough light down there to grow algae. Right? So they are living on all the stuff from the upper well-lit ocean that sinks down. So think about that for a moment. They're a couple of thousand, feet underwater or meters underwater, right? And they're eating things that rain down from above them. Being able to eat something when you find it and eat a lot of it is a really good thing. So some of these fish have bellies that can distend, and they can eat other prey items like their own body size or close anyway. So they hunt and they hunt and they hunt, and then they eat a big meal, and then they're good for a few weeks or months. So it's a very different lifestyle than what you and I are used to, that they're not likely eating every 4 hours.
I think the fish that he was talking about was it was so you'd think it was giant, but it was actually pretty small, like as big as your hand. And then
No,
it was
as big as your arm.
it was pretty small, like
Okay.
it was bigger than it was. And it did have an extending jaw, and it was like
It was
dragonfish.
It was like brownish black. Yeah, it was something like a dragonfish. Yeah, it was really cool.
So dragonfish are also really cool. There's there are a bunch of different neat things that dragonfish do, and we could look, folks. I mean, we could talk about, people spend their entire lives studying these kind of crazy fishes. Let me tell you one cool thing about some of these. Since you mentioned dragonfish, right? There are a lot of fishes that do that. Some of them are really small; they're about this big, and then they can eat something as big as they are, and then their bellies get huge. Others of them are larger, and they're kind of predators in that midwater environment. But I want to tell you a story about one fish that I have a soft spot for. It's called a stoplight loose jaw fish, right? And it's a long black fish, and it has something really neat. It has night vision. Let me explain. I mentioned that when you get down into the deep ocean, there's either very little sunlight or it gets totally dark below 1,000 meters. Dark in terms of sunlight. There's no sunlight. But a lot of animals are bioluminescent, and they make amazing. They have amazing displays of light that they make themselves.
Bioluminescent creatures like swimming by each other. It's really cool.
Right? It's unreal. And a colleague of mine, many colleagues of mine, study this bioluminescence. Most of the animals that are bioluminescent in the deep sea are making light in the blue-green, and thus their eyes have evolved to see light that's in the blue-green. So you can see your predators, you can see your prey, all that kind of stuff, right? Some fishes seem to have the ability to change the color of that light from blue-green to red. And not a lot of fishes have the ability to see red light. So imagine that you're a fish and you want to hunt other fish, and you can make a color of light that your prey can't see.
So
that's what I mean by night vision. What's that, Eli?
You can see them, but they can't see you.
Bingo. So that's something that this stoplight loose jaw fish does, and it's got these red little organs under its eyes that project that red light, we think, and it helps them look for their prey. It's so cool. They also do what you're talking about. They have a jaw that really distends out, but even weirder than that, their jaw doesn't have this thing of skin and flesh under here. Sometimes it's called a buccal membrane. They don't have that. They just have this jaw. So they look kind of like a skeleton fish. Oh, they're so cool. So lots of neat things about these deep sea fishes.
Okay, now I'm going to ask a question about my personal, I think it's pretty cool, which is, what's the weirdest thing about the vampire squid? I don't think it's called a vampire squid, but I call that, and I feel like it's
it was called vampire squid.
It's called something like that.
It's a vampire squid.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
So what's the weirdest thing about the vampire squid? So the vampire squid is actually called the vampire squid. Its Latin name is Vampiroteuthis infernalis. And that translates into vampire squid from hell. Right? So it is literally called the vampire squid. I think they're really cool. One of the reasons people like them is they're so weird and mysterious. One of the things I think that's amazing about them is they can live in parts of our ocean where there's very little oxygen. Now, I want you two to know that there's plenty of oxygen at the ocean surface because it mixes with the air, right?
Mm-hmm.
Believe it or not, in general, there's plenty of oxygen in the deep sea. You can go down to the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the Mariana Trench, and there's oxygen. About half what you see at the surface, but it's plenty for most animals to live. There's this weird thing that happens in the ocean. It's kind of like a sandwich, where in the middle of the ocean, at a couple of 100 meters down, sometimes oxygen drops really low. And when you get to that part of the water, you don't see a lot of animals until you go deeper and oxygen comes back up and animals are there. So there's this weird kind of depth in which there's very low oxygen, and that's where the vampire squid flourishes. It's able to get oxygen out of the water around it even when there's very little there.
How is there just 10 meters of no oxygen?
Yeah, great question. All right. So this is going to really bake your noodle, as a friend of mine used to say, right? It's going to really mess with your head. Remember, I told you there's a bunch of life at the surface, right? We're familiar with that. And when that stuff dies, it sinks down through the ocean, right? There gets to be a point where it starts to sink a little bit slower, and the microbes start to eat it. And microbes are really good at growing very fast. So they get to this depth where the microbes now, they're chomping away on all this organic stuff. They're just eating all the dead stuff, all the fish poo, fish scales, you name it. And they're eating so much of it. There's so much sort of food available that they're using all the oxygen. Isn't that crazy? Now, and it's important, and I don't want to leave you with the sort of sense that oxygen is now gone, but and never goes, there's no oxygen in the seafloor. Again, it's only in this horizon. But the oxygen in the deep sea is there because the ocean does circulate. It's just over very long time scales. So what tends to happen, Eli, is you get this really weirdly stable zone where oxygen is low and it just stays low for much of the year. It fluctuates a bit, but that's the vampire squid's advantage. It doesn't care about that at all, and it does great. And it can hunt on and feed on. It tends to eat a lot of debris, so it lives in this zone and it doesn't have a lot of competition, right? So it can eat a lot of detritus or little things that are around it, and that's its specialty.
I have not seen, like, I've heard, maybe this is another fish I'm getting confused with, but I heard it could like flip inside out.
Ooh, now vampire squids do that. So I think if you're asking, is it the vampire squid that turns inside out? Oh, you bet. So it takes its arms and think of it, and its arms have webbing between the arms, kind of like on a duck foot, right? And it can like fold its arms over itself and look like a spiky ball.
And doesn't it like it come out the other side too?
I've never really seen any good footage of it. Do you
Because
have?
Oh, you have come to the right place, my friend. Let's see if we can find ourselves some good footage. I think I know exactly where to look. So give me a minute. Here we go.
it's always like a bit blurry or way too fast.
All right. So let's see. Let me make sure I find one that. Okay, so give me a second, folks. I want to sort of watch this and make sure that it's doing what I think it's doing. Here we go. Oh yeah, cool. All right, so let me go ahead and do that. I'll hit play. Okay, close that. All right. Hopefully your dad will edit my muttering to myself out. Okay, so you want to see a vampire squid turn inside out? Here we go. And let's talk about what's happening when we watch this. All right, so this again is from my colleagues at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And it's a video in which they're talking about what squid eat. Now, this is a hunting squid, right? These squid will go and they'll hunt fish. They'll actually eat other squid, believe it or not. So a lot of squid are pretty voracious hunters, but we don't think that's what the vampire squid does. I'm going to jump ahead here and I'm going to go to the vampire squid. So just so let's refresh our memories. That's the vampire squid. Isn't that cool?
We can see how it's cute. These little blue eyes.
Right? I think it's beautiful. And it's pretty sluggish, but it feeds off of a lot of the little debris you see around here by putting out these little sticky arms. This, we think, is a defensive behavior. So a lot of people say, oh my God, it's turning itself inside out. Not exactly, but it's taking its arms and its webbing and turning itself into a spiky ball, which probably looks a lot less interesting to eat, right? So there you go. Isn't that cool?
Are the spikes actually spiky, or do they just look spiky?
They just look spiky. That's another big secret about life in the deep sea. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause here, and then we can get back to talking. Another big secret about life in the deep sea, Eli and Daisy, is that when you see things that look spiky and ferocious, sometimes they're not so hard and stabby. A lot of the sharp-looking teeth you see on those scary fishes like anglerfish, they're not hard. They wouldn't stab you. If you touch them, they bend. They feel like a soft fingernail. So that's true for the vampire squid too. Those little spikes are not hard. They don't have calcium and other minerals that make them hard, not calcium carbonate, other things that make them hard. So they look scary, but for us, they don't really represent, they're like an anglerfish couldn't puncture your skin if it bit you.
Yeah, and if it did have calcium, then we probably wouldn't swim that deep.
That's so, Eli, one of the challenges for these midwater fishes is that if they had teeth that were really hard, and they had a lot of kind of calcium carbonate and those kinds of things, like your teeth and my teeth, bone, that's heavy. Bone's heavy. And it means that they're going to start to sink, and then they have to spend energy to stay afloat. And that's just not what you want to do when you're in a low energy environment, a low food environment, right? So, yeah. Oh man, you guys got great questions.
I all my questions are done. I mostly had just straightforward questions, the questions that you just need to ask.
Your questions were great, Eli. They were really sharp. What about you, Daisy?
I have one more main one.
Bring it on.
How many times have you gone deep sea diving?
Say it again.
How many times have you gone deep sea diving?
So I think I've been on about 11. I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember, because that's unfortunately how my brain works, but it's something around that. I've done most of them in a submarine called Alvin, as I mentioned, and I've done a few in some other submarines. Now, with robot subs, I've been on quite a many dive with robot subs where I stay on the ship and we're diving the robot. So I mean, that's in the hundreds. One of my favorite things about the submarine, Daisy, is it's a really, unique experience going in a submersible and looking out a window and realizing you're, 12,000 feet underwater. It's pretty awesome. My favorite thing about the robot is that I get to take anyone on that dive with me that is interested. So next time, Daisy and Eli, I have a dive where I'm using the robot. I'd love to reach out to you two and invite you to join me. And there'd be a website that you can go to where you can actually watch us doing the work, and you can type in questions and we'll answer them in real time.
After COVID.
So actually, this is an interesting point. So one of the things, Eli, about using the robot subs the way we do is this coming fall, we're sending a ship out. It's called the Nautilus. And the Nautilus has a crew that's going to self-quarantine together, and then they're going to go out on the boat, and they should be completely safe, right? It's like building a family because there's no communication with people from shore. So if they quarantine and if everybody comes out in the clear, they're going to get set sail with their robot sub. And I'm going to be doing some work from shore. I'm going to be calling in and actually running the operations, at least in part, from shore. And you two can join us. The website is nautiluslive.org.
I'll write that down.
Yeah, so it's NAUT ILUS live. That's NAUT. I'll repeat it one more time. That's NAUT ILUS LIVE. The word Nautilus, the word live.org. And if you go there, and if we're doing a research cruise, you'll see different lead scientists, not just me. There are many other scientists who are playing the lead scientist role. And you'll get to watch it live in real time, right there from the comfort of your home. And there's a question and answer box that you can type questions in. Now, if I'm at sea and I'm the lead scientist and you want to shoot me off an email, I'll happily give you a phone call so we can actually talk while I'm on the ship. And then you guys can help me do some of the science by keeping your eyes on what we're doing. Sound good?
Okay, yeah.
All right, you're on.
So,
that's all our questions. Do you have anything else you want to tell us, or?
Those are great questions. I do have a question for each of you. So, first question, let's start with Daisy. So, Daisy, if you wanted to be a marine scientist, what do you think you would be? Would you want to be a biologist, a geologist, a chemist, an engineer? Would you want to be a captain? What catches your attention?
Well, I'm probably gonna forget all the names, so I'll just say what's interesting to me. I like the vampire squid, and I have dissected things before, and I'm not that afraid to dissect things. Like, I don't really mind. I mean, of course I'll feel bad for the animal, but it's for science. So And
You
I
would
mean,
be a marine biologist.
I think I would get pretty distracted watching animals.
Yep.
You'd be a great
I
marine
wouldn't.
biologist. Each time I get to pilot the submersible.
So Eli, well, thank you, Daisy. So that sounds like you've definitely got the skills and the makings of a good marine biologist. Now, Eli, I'm sorry, you said you want to pilot the submersible? Yeah. Yeah, and so this is a cool thing, Eli. Thanks for answering those questions for me. But it gives me a chance to share with the two of you and all of those who watch this. Like, it takes all kinds to do the work that we do in the ocean. It really does. That's not just some like, oh, everybody matters. That is real, folks. Everybody does matter. When we go to sea, there is a group of people, the engineers and the deck hands, who keep the ship safe and sound. Without their work, bad things happen. There are people on board ships who are the chefs, and they're really good, right? It's like a floating restaurant, and they have to be really creative because, if you're out on a boat for 7 or 8 weeks, which sometimes happens, you just can't go buy fresh lettuce, right? So they're very innovative. There are folks who are up on the bridge, the captains and the navigators. And then, of course, there's the scientists and then the engineers who do all of this. So it really does take a team. I have a silly joke that I tell people who, like me, have PhDs. What I'm about to say is not entirely true, but I like to tease them sometimes because a lot of PhDs, we've spent our life studying our very focused area, right? And so sometimes that means we might not be so good at repairing an engine, or we might not be as effective at, welding. And so I'd tease them sometimes saying, if I ever got on a boat that was run by PhDs, holy cow, I'd get off because they'd crash and sink it. That's what we would all do. So that's my way of reminding us all that everybody absolutely contributes to the science, from the people who are helping keep the ship clean and safe to the people who are scientists. They are literally all important.
Really good
Yeah, I
food.
really want to try the stuff they cook. Like, that would be interesting.
So, like,
Can you give us like some examples of what they would cook?
like just like 7 weeks in, like.
I love that, Eli. Good point about the 7 weeks in. Good question, Daisy. So when we start a research cruise, Daisy and Eli, we'll often start with lots of fresh vegetables and really good food. Even if you're vegetarian or you're not, they will have amazing like vegetarian ravioli. Like, I'm talking like wild mushroom ravioli and risotto, like really good food. For the meat eaters, they'll have really nice ribs, or they'll have steaks, or we'll have like really amazing chicken or turkey or seafood too. By the time you're 7 or 8 weeks in, a lot of those things are still there. There's still plenty, generally meat because they freeze well. And they'll make a lot of other vegetarian dishes, but the fresh vegetables are usually gone. What's really cool to me is that the things that we do have after 7 or 8 weeks are the things that last a long time, like apples. So generally, there's apples, like they'll buy hundreds of apples, right? Sorry, that's announcement. So let me just say that again. So there's lots of apples, pears last a long time, but we definitely don't have things like lettuce. So you'll see that instead of fresh green salads, suddenly the coleslaw will come out because cabbage lasts like forever.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Do you have any more questions for us? Or?
No, you two are wonderful. You guys like really got this. So if you're ever thinking of being a marine scientist, you know where to find me. Give me a call. I love working with high school students as interns in the lab. I'm just saying.
I think I have one more question.
Yeah, bring it.
Which is also related to food because it's so interesting.
Do you fish on the boat?
That's the only time I catch anything, Eli. I'm a terrible fisher person. I'm absolutely horrible at it, except when I'm on a boat, because in the middle of the ocean,
Can't not.
we'll hit it. Yeah, right. We'll hit a school of tuna, and then it's like they're easy to catch.
So my question is, if there's picky eaters, like if somebody doesn't like apples or is allergic to something, do the chefs always find a way around it? And
Wonderful.
It's an obvious answer, but
do they just like ask everybody what their food preference are.
That's what they do. Yeah, and Daisy, it's really good that you brought that up because that was not always the case. Even about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of ships had far fewer vegetarian options or gluten-free options. But nowadays, before we go to sea, the chefs actually ask all the crew member and all the science party, right, the two groups coming on board, what are your food allergies? What do you like to eat? And so on. And they'll generally make a separate special meal. And a lot of times it's really good.
If they're a professional chef, it can't really not be good.
Yeah, it's and of course, Eli, on occasion, sometimes things don't turn out the way you want, or you got someone who's really not so inspired. The worst meal I think I've ever had on a ship was admittedly in the middle of a hurricane, so everybody was feeling terribly sick anyway. But the chef had put out the steward had put out boiled spaghetti noodles, just kind of the noodles, and boiled green peas, and that was it. It was dinner. I've had worse. I've also had better.
Yeah, it sounds like for a ship where there's like a really good chef, that does sound like pretty bad.
No, honestly, you two, generally it's awesome. So I hope that if either of you two get really excited about marine science, give me a buzz, because I really would, I do love working with early career scientists like yourselves when you're in high school. Yeah, and do tune in to nautiluslive.org. It is a blast.
We definitely will, if we remember. I know I won't remember, so I'll probably have reminding me or something.
Well, I'll bug your parents then. Thanks, friends.
Thank you.
That was super cool.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good one. We'll catch you later.